I made this simple anime style cityscape background in Blender, and in this video I'll walk you through the entire process from blockout all the way to the final render. The workflow is divided into 4 different parts and we'll go through all of them. Before I start, all the files I use are linked in the description if you want to follow along. Now let's get into it. I started with a very basic blockout, literally just simple cubes to figure out the shapes, the scale and the camera angle. For anime backgrounds, the overall silhouette and composition matter way more than tiny details, so all I care about right now was getting clean big shapes and a nice depth layout with foreground, midground and background layers. I also added some very basic lighting, and for the camera I used a higher focal length like around 100 because it compresses the perspective and makes the whole scene feel a bit more flat in 2D, which fits the anime background style better. So just a super quick mini tutorial to add outlines. You press Shift A, go to Grease Pencil, select Scene or Collection Line Art. Collection as it gives a bit more control. Increase the line radius and maybe just turn off crease threshold in edge types. And yeah, there you have it. Now back to the video. Alright, so moving on to the modeling and texturing, I keep both of these as one combined step because the textures essentially are the building. I'm using just 2 simple textures to create all the buildings, and I've also included them in the project file if you want to try this yourself. The workflow is super straightforward. I start with a basic cube, plug the texture into the material and use UV mapping with the texture coordinate node, and then I just UV unwrap the cube using cube projection, which instantly lays out the texture cleanly on all sides. After that, the array modifier does most of the work, repeating the same block to create as many floors. And to get variations across the environment, I just tweak the shape, size or proportions of the base mesh or slightly adjust the colors or materials. That alone gives me enough variety without having to model multiple buildings. Once the buildings are ready, I go back to the blockout and start replacing those simple placeholder cubes with the actual textured buildings now. This is where the blockout stage really helps because the composition is already figured out and all I'm doing now is swapping meshes one by one without really guessing anything. I also added a simple sky background to push the anime vibe even further, which is just a simple image plane placed far behind the buildings. I also added an HDRI just to add some natural ambient light. You can use any HDRI you already have, it does not need to be anything specific. Here I'm also trying to build the foreground a bit, adding some details like some railings, but I ended up removing them later on anyways. And after finishing the modeling and texturing, this is what the scene looked like. It was starting to come together, but it still felt pretty empty and repetitive. Which brings me to step 3, detailing. Everything looked too uniform, so I started adding a few elements to break that up. I added some billboards, which again are just flat image planes placed on top of buildings. I used the hue saturation node to control the color and even create color variations using the same billboard textures. I also quickly modeled a street light to add in the foreground. Using reference images to create models this way is super simple and really quick. I basically just used a cylinder and extruded it according to the image, and later on also used a path object to create the curvier parts. Small props like these help the environment feel less copy-pasted and a bit more alive. I also wanted to set up a proper background, so I added a few simple buildings in the distance and placed some fog image planes in front of them. That gives the scene a bit more atmospheric feel, and here's the simple material I used for these fog planes. And in this material you can either use the color ramp or the emission node to control the power of the fog, like how bright you want them to be. To add even more variation, here I am using a simple billboard texture sheet. With just one texture you can create multiple different signs by duplicating and pressing G twice to slide the edge across the plane and adjust the texture accordingly. And well, after all the added details, we went from something like this to this. And that brings me to the final step, which is lighting and compositing. I start inside Blender's compositor and use a few simple nodes like glare to get that soft anime style glow, along with a bit of chromatic aberration and a subtle vignette to finish the look. After setting up the daytime render, I honestly wasn't fully happy with the vibe, so I decided to create a separate evening variation. For the evening version, I changed the sky background first, lowered the sun lamp temperature for a warmer yellow tone, and adjusted the fog emission color to match the mood. Also worth mentioning that I used the standard color space for this project, which I find gives me better results for anime style scenes compared to AGX or Filmic. After that, I take the render into Photoshop for a few final touches. I added some sharpening, a bit of vibrance and saturation, adjusted the levels and used an overlay to add a sunbeam effect. With these overlays, you can set the blending mode to screen or linear dodge and just dial the opacity until it feels right. I also paint in some fake light for the street lamps and blur it with Gaussian blur to get that soft glow. And with that, we are done with the compositing as well. And you can see we have improved the scene a lot, as this is the scene now and this was it before all of the compositing. And with that, the scene is done. If you enjoyed the breakdown, feel free to like the video and subscribe for more anime style stuff. Drop any questions you have in the comments or let me know if there is a scene you would like to see me work on next. Thanks for watching.